The Babylonian captivity, spanning from 586 to 539 BCE, was a critical period in Jewish history, marked by the forced exile of the Jewish elite and much of the population of the Kingdom of Judah to Babylon. This period began with the rise of the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar II, who launched a series of military campaigns against Judah. In 605 BCE, after the Battle of Carchemish, Babylon asserted its dominance over the region, and Judah became a vassal state. However, following repeated rebellions by the Judean kings, Nebuchadnezzar responded with increasingly harsh measures. In 597 BCE, Jerusalem was besieged, and King Jehoiachin, along with thousands of artisans, nobles, and soldiers, was deported to Babylon. A puppet king, Zedekiah, was installed but eventually rebelled as well. In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar returned, this time destroying Jerusalem entirely, including the first temple built by Solomon. This event marked the beginning of what is traditionally considered the Babylonian exile. During the exile, many Jews were settled in Babylon and other parts of the empire. While this displacement was traumatic and marked a deep spiritual and cultural rupture, it was also a time of adaptation and resilience. The exiled Jewish community maintained their identity, preserved their religious traditions, and began compiling significant parts of the Hebrew Bible. Without a central temple, the synagogue and Torah study gained importance, laying the foundations for later rabbinic Judaism. The exile also influenced Jewish thought about divine justice, covenant, and messianic hope. Though life in Babylon was not one of slavery, many Jews could own property and engage in trade, it was nonetheless a period of longing for a return to their homeland. This longing and spiritual reflection would eventually culminate in renewed hopes when a new power emerged in the region, the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. The rise of Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire marks a transformative era in the ancient Near East during the mid-6th century BCE. Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, initially ruled the small Persian kingdom of Anshan in what is now southwestern Iran. At the time, Persia was a vassal state under the control of the Median Empire. Around 559 BCE, Cyrus inherited the throne from his father, Cambyses I, and began consolidating power. By 550 BCE, he led a successful rebellion against his Median overlord, King Astyages, ultimately overthrowing the Medes and uniting the Persian and Median peoples under his rule. This victory laid the foundation of the Achaemenid Empire, the First Persian Empire. Cyrus quickly expanded his domain through a series of brilliant and relatively humane military campaigns. In 547 or 546 BCE, he turned westward and defeated Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, absorbing that powerful kingdom into his empire. He continued to expand eastward and into Central Asia, securing control over vast territories and diverse populations. What set Cyrus apart from other conquerors of his time was his policy of tolerance and respect for local customs, religions, and governance structures. This approach helped him win the support of newly conquered peoples and ensured the stability of his rapidly growing empire. By the time he set his sights on Babylon, Cyrus had already gained a reputation as a liberator rather than a mere conqueror. His method of governance, marked by administrative efficiency, strategic diplomacy, and religious tolerance, was instrumental in transforming Persia from a regional power into a vast empire stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. The conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE would not only complete his domination of Mesopotamia, but also cement his legacy as one of history's most enlightened rulers. In 539 BCE, the powerful city of Babylon fell to the Persian Empire, marking a major turning point in Near Eastern history and in the fate of the Jewish people. The Babylonian Empire, under King Nabonidus, had become increasingly unpopular due to his religious reforms and absence from Babylon, which alienated the powerful priesthood and much of the population. Sensing this internal discontent, Cyrus the Great, already renowned for his effective military strategy and tolerant rule, launched a campaign to take Babylon. In October of that year, Persian forces decisively defeated the Babylonian army at the Battle of Opis near the Tigris River. Soon after, the city of Sippar surrendered without resistance. On October 12, 539 BCE, Babylon itself was entered by the Persian army without a battle, reportedly through diverted canals that allowed them to bypass the city's fortifications. The operation was carried out by Cyrus's general, Gobryas, and was met with minimal resistance due to the widespread dissatisfaction with Nabonidus. Cyrus himself entered the city on October 29th in a ceremonial procession, presenting himself not as a conqueror but as a restorer of order and protector of Babylon's traditional gods. This approach earned him significant support from the local population and religious elites. Shortly after his takeover, Cyrus issued a policy of repatriation and religious freedom, which included the liberation of the Jews who had been exiled in Babylon since the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. According to biblical sources, notably the Book of Ezra, Cyrus proclaimed that the Jews were free to return to Judah and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He also returned sacred temple vessels that had been seized by the Babylonians decades earlier, although not mentioned by name. This decree is echoed in the Cyrus Cylinder, an ancient Akkadian inscription that outlines Cyrus's general policy of restoring displaced peoples and their religious practices. For the Jews, this moment marked the end of the Babylonian exile and the beginning of a new chapter in their religious and national identity under Persian rule. In 538 BCE, following his conquest of Babylon, Cyrus the Great issued a decree that allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their ancestral homelands and restore their places of worship. This declaration, known as the Edict of Cyrus, is one of the earliest recorded examples of a ruler implementing a policy of religious tolerance and repatriation. The Hebrew Bible, particularly in the books of Ezra and 2 Chronicles, records this edict as a direct fulfillment of divine prophecy, portraying Cyrus as an instrument of God's will. In Ezra 1:2-4, the edict proclaims that the God of heaven had charged Cyrus to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and that any of God's people among the exiles were free to return and undertake this task. The edict also instructed neighboring peoples to support the returnees with silver, gold, goods, and livestock for the journey and for the temple's reconstruction. Though the original inscription of the edict has not been found, its authenticity is supported by the broader policies described in the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay artifact written in Akkadian that outlines Cyrus's restoration of religious sanctuaries and return of displaced peoples across the empire. While the cylinder does not mention the Jews specifically, it confirms Cyrus's general approach to governance, which emphasized respect for local traditions and autonomy. Soon after the edict, a significant number of Jews chose to return to Judah under the leadership of Sheshbazzar, a prince of Judah appointed by the Persians, and possibly also under Zerubbabel, a descendant of King David. They carried with them sacred vessels that had been taken from the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar, which Cyrus had ordered to be returned. Although not all Jews returned, many had established lives in Babylon and chose to remain. The first wave of returnees laid the foundation for the re-establishment of Jewish life in Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of the post-exilic period and the slow process of rebuilding the Jewish community and its central sanctuary, the temple, which would be completed decades later. After the return of the first group of Jewish exiles to Judah around 537 BCE, the immediate focus became the restoration of religious life and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. The returnees, facing a ruined city and limited resources, began by re-establishing basic worship practices. According to the Book of Ezra, they rebuilt the altar on the Temple Mount and resumed the offering of sacrifices, following the rituals outlined in the Torah. This act was not only religiously significant, but also symbolically marked the reassertion of Jewish identity after decades in exile. The foundations for the Second Temple were laid shortly afterward, and there was great enthusiasm among the people. However, the rebuilding process faced many obstacles. The local populations, including Samaritans and other groups who had settled in the region during the exile, offered to help, but were rejected by the Jewish leadership. This led to opposition and interference, including appeals to Persian officials to halt the construction. As a result, work on the temple stalled for many years, and the community focused on survival and rebuilding basic infrastructure. It was not until 520 BCE, during the reign of Darius I, that momentum returned to the temple project. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah played a crucial role in encouraging the people to resume construction, reminding them of their covenant with God and urging them not to neglect the spiritual foundation of their community. With renewed determination and imperial permission from Darius, work on the temple resumed in earnest. Finally, in 516 BCE, 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, the second temple was completed. Though it lacked the grandeur and sacred objects of Solomon's temple, it became the new spiritual center of Jewish life. Its dedication marked the formal end of the Babylonian exile and the beginning of the Second Temple period, a time of religious revival, scriptural development, and communal reconstruction that would shape Judaism for centuries to come. The liberation of the Jews by Cyrus the Great and the events that followed hold profound historical, religious, and cultural significance. Politically, Cyrus's decree marked a major shift in imperial governance. Unlike previous empires that suppressed local identities, the Persian model promoted religious freedom and local autonomy, which contributed to the stability and longevity of the Achaemenid Empire. For the Jewish people, the return from exile was a moment of spiritual renewal and national restoration. It allowed them to rebuild the temple, re-establish their religious practices, and begin a new chapter in their communal life under Persian protection. Religiously, the events were interpreted as divine fulfillment of prophecy. The Hebrew Bible presents Cyrus not merely as a foreign king, but as a chosen instrument of God's plan. In the book of Isaiah, he is even referred to as the Lord's Anointed, a title usually reserved for Jewish kings and priests. This elevated status gave rise to a unique theological concept that God could work through non-Israelite rulers to fulfill his purposes. This idea would resonate deeply in later Jewish and Christian thought. Culturally and historically, the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple marked the beginning of the Second Temple period, a transformative era in Jewish history. It was during this time that Jewish identity began to be shaped more around scripture, law, and synagogue worship, rather than monarchy and territory alone. The experiences of exile and return also influenced the development of Jewish theology, including themes of repentance, covenant renewal, and messianic hope. The legacy of Cyrus endures not only in Jewish memory, but also in global history. He is remembered as a model of enlightened leadership, and his policies of tolerance are celebrated in documents such as the Cyrus Cylinder, often described as an early declaration of human rights. In modern times, Cyrus is honored both in Jewish tradition and in Iranian culture, symbolizing a rare convergence of national histories and religious ideals. His actions in 538 BCE set in motion a period of renewal that would profoundly shape the identity and destiny of the Jewish people for generations.